Hey guys, what's poppin'? Turk here. Hope you're having a good one. One of the biggest questions we get on our PC part picker streams is what's the best value gaming PC you can build me? And rather than give you guys some generic advice, I picked up a whole bunch of that value hardware, and today we're going to be talking about different hardware configs, graphics settings, and basically give you the best value PC you can build for under 600 bucks, and it's going to be a doozy. So stick around, we're going to save you guys some money. So a lot of people on YouTube like to call this particular build, the console killer or an entry-level computer. But for me, the mindset with this build is a base level computer that is expandable. So you can upgrade, graphics cards or upgrade the memory over time. And today, we're actually going to put some data that backs up a lot of these recommendations, and we're also going to change up the hardware configs to both optimize for performance as well as save some money at the same time in order to get to that $600 sweet spot. So the first piece of hardware that's going to set us apart from, like a pre-built computer is going to be the power supply, and for that, we're going to go with the EVGA 600BR. It's right around 60 to 70 bucks, and the main reasons I got it is it's got enough power for bigger graphics cards in the future. It's got 80 plus bronze certification, as well as 2 PCIe power connectors that's going to be able to equip, more powerful graphics cards in the future. It is not fully modular, but at this price point, we have to give up a few creature comforts to get, longevity going forward into the future. So the main board we're using with this build is the Asus B450 Prime. This is the micro ATX variant. The main reason I got it, to be honest, is it was right around 70 bucks. Asus has a really good UEFI or BIOS, so if you're going to want to tweak any settings, this is a great option. But as long as you're getting a decent motherboard in the $70 price range, MSI Bazookas, I think, or the Gigabyte Aorus line, those are great options. So that's what we're going to throw all these parts on. The processor we're going to be using today is the Ryzen 5 3600. This is probably one of the more popular value options on the market these days. Very well reviewed, 6 cores, 12 threads, boosts up to, I think, 4.2 gigahertz. Yeah, so really great processor. Zen 2 is a great architecture. But we're also going to throw at it the 1600X. That's the first gen Ryzen processor. We got it installed in our rig right now. 6 cores and 12 threads again, but it doesn't boost as high and it's not as fast. But, some of the data shows it's still a pretty good option. Both of these processors are going to land you right around 160 to 200 bucks. So it's going to cost you quite a bit of money, but it is going to be a pretty good investment for the base of your computer. So the biggest challenge we're going to come across with this build and this price range is going to be graphics horsepower, but we do have a couple options. If you like NVIDIA, we recommend the GTX 1650 Super. This can be bought brand new right around 160 bucks. The primary reason I like this card is it has the latest NVENC encoder, which if you're going to stream, will provide you with good encoding capabilities so that your CPU doesn't get choked out, which could be beneficial with this price range. It's not the highest quality component. We've got some plastic shrouds all about this thing. It's pretty dinky, but it performs. It does a pretty good job. If you didn't want an NVIDIA option, we do have, of course, the RX 580. This is probably one of the more popular value 1080p cards. This one particular is from Asus. It is a beefy boy. 8 gigabytes of VRAM, clearly a good graphics card for 1080p and even 1440p. These can be found on eBay for like 80 bucks, 100 bucks. Retail, they're not a really good deal, so this is a pretty decent option if you're willing to take the risks with eBay. So here's the first point of contention with this build, and that's how much RAM we're going to need. A lot of prominent YouTubers still recommend 16 gigs of RAM, but I'm going to challenge you guys. I'm going to say 8 gigabytes is enough. But for that, we went ahead and picked up the DDR4 3200 from Corsair. This is their Vengeance line. 16 gigabytes, 2 8 gigabyte sticks. We're going to test both configurations, 1 stick, 2 stick, red stick, blue stick. You'll see what it looks like. So the last component we got to spend some pretty good money is going to be the storage. And, we've recommended smaller NVMe drives as well as larger spinning disks. But I think a good balance is in need here. And for that, we're going to go with the ADATA SU800. It's probably one of the better performing 512 gigabyte hard drives on the market. It's almost big enough to fit all of the games with our benchmark suite. You know, Call of Duty is just a massive game. If we got rid of that one, we could fit all of them on here. But most people aren't going to be able to tell the performance difference. So I think 512 is a good, compromise with cost, capacity, and speed. So at the time of recording, we tallied up all the costs and we are sitting right at about $620. We do need to keep in mind we need a case for this build, so we can budget, 40 to 60 bucks there. And then a legit Windows key is going to cost us, 15 bucks or so if you get it from a site like scdkey.com. We could buy parts from different websites. We can look and wait for sales to happen, but I'm going to say the data we're about to show you can probably save you that extra money by going with some older hardware that provides just the same amount of performance. So without further ado, let's get right into the charts. Before we start playing any games, I want to set some baselines, and to do that, let's run some 3D Mark synthetics. Looking at the colored bars here, the orange is going to be the CPU score, and we notice that that changes once we swap out the 1600X with the more modern 3600. Taking a look at the green bar, we notice that changes when you swap out the 1650 with the RX 580. Clearly, we're seeing changes going when we're swapping out hardware. The combined score is also increasing, so this is all looking good for us. So let's take a look at Firestrike Extreme. We see similar trends here, but the deltas are just not as drastic, and that's mainly because the workload is much heavier and requires more graphics horsepower. I'm glad we still see the trends, but we do start to see that both of these, all of this hardware in this budget system, just start to lose a little bit of steam, and we prove that point even further when we go into Time Spy. The 1650 Super actually pulls ahead of the RX 580 in this instance, which is kind of weird, but the processor trend we saw earlier still applies. We went ahead and threw in the GTX 1080 data in here as well, just to prove that if you want to save for a couple more months and get a used GTX 1080 or something, that's going to be a much better solution, but that's mainly just for reference. Another baseline I'd like to set is just how good will this computer be at just everyday tasks. PC Mark 10 does a good job of that by simulating some of these tasks and kind of lumping them into different bars, and let's talk about that. The blue bar is your Word documents, Excels, and PowerPoints, and you can tell that once we swap in the better processor, our score increases quite a bit. Going into the orange bar, the productivity, we do see an increase when we swap into the new graphics card, and then it also compounds even more when we swap in a better processor as well. Content creation in green clearly just likes the increased horsepower from the graphics card, and we already talked about gaming performance with 3D Mark. So let's hop into some video games. If you were hoping to play some Call of Duty Modern Warfare with this value computer, I would say you're in pretty good luck. Regardless of the processor and the GPU we tested, we were able to average right around 80 frames per second. That's that green bar here on the chart. But once we kick it up into the 1440p, that's when we can start to see that this graphics card and this processor just really do struggle to play this modern game at the higher resolutions. Keep in mind we are playing the single player campaign, so we might see some different results with multiplayer. So if you want to see that, let us know down in the comments. Maybe we can do a follow-up video in the future. Ripping and tearing through the brand new Doom Eternal is not a problem with this budget PC. We do recommend the RX 580 in this instance because it is able to maintain impressive performance through 1080p and 1440p. We do see about a 10 to 20 frame per second drop going from the medium detail preset down to high, and we do want to warn that if you're going to go with the 1650 Super, it just doesn't have enough VRAM to load the larger textures and detail settings, so RX 580 gets our nod of approval here. Rainbow Six Siege is a pretty easy game to play from a hardware perspective, and our budget PC shows that with flying colors. At 1080p, we're averaging 150 frames per second, regardless of the processor or the graphics card. We do note that we get lower FPS minimums with the 1650 Super, and that shows itself also at the 1440p settings, but still, we're averaging above 100 frames per second on average. get yourself an adaptive refresh rate monitor and go have some fun. After playing a few rounds of quick play on Overwatch, 1080p ultra settings played really well across all the different hardware tested today. We did see some CPU bottlenecking, so if that's something that concerns you, the 3600 is probably a better option to go with here. And if you wanted to play 1440p, we did average above 60 FPS, but it just wasn't as smooth as the 1080p. So the hardware can do it. It's up to you if that's what you want to go with. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is probably the heaviest game we're going to be playing on our budget PC today, and we recommend sticking to 1080p here because at high and medium settings, we're able to push just about minimum at a 60 frames per second threshold, and overall the experience was pretty good regardless of the graphics card or processor. But, let's steer clear of the 1440p. It just couldn't keep up with the heavy horsepower needed for this game, and it's just not a very good experience. Looking forward to future titles this year, Cyberpunk 2077, etc. This budget rig is probably going to be stuck at 1080p for that. GTA is a pretty old game at this point, but it still has plenty of legs on it, and this is a good instance of where we would actually recommend the 1650 Super combo instead of some of the other AMD ones, because we're able to push faster frame rates at both 1080p and 1440p when we're running the high preset. And we're also going to take a quick look at some of the different preset performances here as well. So with that 1650 Super combo, if you go up to normal, you're able to push pretty impressive frame rates. I think that high is just a really good balance of performance and graphic fidelity. And going down to very high, I just don't think you get enough visual improvement for the 50 frame per second you're giving up for it. So 1650 Super, still a good combination if you're wanting to build a budget PC. Since we've changed both the processor and the graphics card quite a bit, let's take some more data and let's change the RAM capacity that we've got. We're still going to run at DDR4 3200 at the default XMP timings, but let's see what these other games perform. Taking a look at GTA 5 here with the different memory configurations. With the 1650 Super, we don't see much of a performance difference. But once you get that RX 580 combo, we do see a little bit of an improvement. It's about, 10% on average. But is that worth $40? I don't think so. And taking a brief look here at Doom Eternal 1080p high, we just don't see much of an improvement. The real improvement here is the minimum frame rates. They do improve quite a bit, especially with that RX 580. But if it's minimum frame rates you're worried about, I don't know if adding RAM should be really your concern. Even taking a look at Rainbow Six Siege at 1440p, if we remove one stick of RAM, all of these different hardware configurations see very little difference when we look at average frame rates. Luckily though, Shadow of the Tomb Raider 1080p high, we do start to see a little bit of improvement, especially with the 1650 Super when we add the additional RAM. But is adding 6 frames per second when we add another stick really worth the extra money? Now that we've got some numbers that show how each of these different hardware configs work, let's do a comparison, see what our upgrade paths look like from a performance standpoint, and see if we can help guide our choices when it comes to hardware. We've got the percent difference when upgrading our CPU, and at 1080p and high, the only games we saw an improvement were Overwatch and Grand Theft Auto. I think Overwatch was 120 frames per second, and Grand Theft Auto was 100. So is that extra 5% really worth the added cost of the better processor? I don't know if it is. Maybe that PC Mark extended data will help push you into that higher tiered processor. If you're going to be doing content creation or just day-to-day tasks, that might be important for you. So here we've got the percent difference when we upgrade the GPU from that 1650 Super up to the RX 580. All of this is at 1080p and high, and on the one hand, Grand Theft Auto clearly loves that 1650 Super, and Doom Eternal, you want that RX 580 to get that extra horsepower, and that's where this debate's going to be, which is better for you. I will say this, though, that all of these games play at this particular setting above 60 frames per second, so you'll be happy with whatever choice you go with. What about if we upgrade the CPU and the GPU? Let's still compare it 1080p and high. Grand Theft Auto still likes that NVIDIA architecture, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it's in the realm of noise. But everything else we've tested over this past week has clearly favored the heavier CPU and GPU combo, ranging from 2.6 all the way to 30% performance. It's hard to refute that. Now let's start shaving some more money off of our build. Let's look at the raw frames per second difference when we double our RAM capacity from 8 gigabytes to 16. That GTA result on that top line there is pretty impressive. But other than that, we are only seeing up to 6 frames per second improvement when we double our RAM capacity. I don't know if that's worth the extra cost. You could save that extra $30 or $40 and put that towards another component in your build. After looking at all that data, guys, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. I think we have a few options here, and if you're wanting to go with the retail build, purely retail, definitely going down to the 8 gigabytes of RAM makes sense here. And hopefully you can snag some of these parts on sale or with some combo deals or something, because right now we're right at that $650 threshold, and it's just not at that $600 price point we were looking for. But if you're willing to take a couple risks, going over to eBay and picking up the 1600X, the RX 580, and the single stick of RAM, we're sitting right at $560, $570, which is a complete bargain of a computer. And the glorious part about it, this thing is upgradable. We can put in a different graphics card if we save up for it. The AM4 socket with AMD, we can put in the 3000 series processor eventually. And just because we got 8 gigabytes of RAM today, doesn't mean next month we can't just go and buy another stick. So I think this is a great starting point for any build, but of course everyone's computer needs are different, so make sure you join our Discord. Links down below. Drop it into our tech support channel. We love to help you guys out. Come talk nerdy with us. It's a good time. But other than that, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I hope this helps you spend money wisely and also helps you game a little bit better. Of course, hit the subscribe button. We've got more Shadow content coming down the pipe, and we've also got more computer hardware reviews coming down. But other than that, have a great night, guys. We'll talk to you later. Nice, got it.